Hello and welcome to the Usability podcast, helping you to create better designs and better experiences every single week. I'm Dr. Chris Parker, and today we are talking about psychology and the role that psychology plays in creating just great user experiences and more intuitive, better quality interfaces. Now, as UX designers, our role is to champion the user, to really give them something which makes them go, wow. Now, at level not all businesses would do naturally. So understanding what helps people go wow, understanding what drives your behavior is naturally a really important part of what we do. But psychology is really overlooked a lot of the time and very misunderstood in general. So to get this out of the way for a start, when I mention psychology to people at parties or just down the pub, that quite a lot of time you get the response, oh yeah, try and work out what I'm thinking. Or that kind of like mind tricks, Darren Brown stuff. Now, firstly, if it's of mind reading tricks, that's magic. You know, it's distraction, illusion, all kind of stuff. That's really not what we're talking about. And if it's all like, diagnose me, no, what am I crazy about? That's psychiatry. Psychiatrists are really important. I mean, that's treating the mind, which has various disorders and hallucinations, etc. But psychiatry is the scientific study of the mind and behavior of humans as animals. So it's looking at observable, measurable behaviors in response to a stimuli. It's not always looking at things that are going, okay, how much you can remember and things. A lot of it's based on what are the hardwired parts of a personality that are built into us as humans. We're going to have variation. We're going to have differences, but there's some commonalities that really bind us together, that when someone gives us a certain stimuli, it's really common to have a certain reaction. Now, if you understand what that is, then you're in a great place to use that, saying, I can now design these stimuli to create the reaction I desire, because I know that this stimuli will create that reaction. Now, an example of this is very simple. If you take bottles of wine, you might have like 4 bottles of wine or 5 bottles of wine lined up in a row, and they've all got no labels, just bottles. They all look equal, and they're all given to you in the same glass, and you're asked to taste them, think about the aroma, think about the taste, think about where in the mouth, where in the palate you're having that taste. What's the experience like? What's the enjoyment like? And what are the flavors that come to mind? All those kind of wine tasting things. Then it's more likely that that 5th bottle in a row, lined up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5th bottle, that's going to get the highest ratings. People will prefer that 40% of the time. And the first bottle might only get as much as 12%. And people will say, oh yeah, that last bottle, it's got richer flavour, it's got more depth, it's got a longer mouthfeel, or whatever you describe wine with. And the truth is, all the bottles of wine are the same. There's something about lining things up in a row that as humans, as this human animal, we go, that 5th thing's really good. And this just goes into kind of the sorting principle that we really think of it as the position effect, that the position of where you place items has a massive influence on what we think they are. Now, you're making a website and you want to put your product as the best, but you can put big banners and say, hey, we are the best. And that might get some people and do some things, but most of the time, if you say we are the best, people go, marketing, and they overlook you. So it's more powerful if a person can come to that conclusion in their own way, in their own time. So why not just put your product along with your competitors and let them try it, let them see it. Now, if you put your product on the very right, it's more likely that with all things being equal, you will be seen as the best. Now, if you don't have a natural advantage and things aren't really great, then going on the right isn't going to make you maybe number 1 if you're not, but it'll give you a slight boost, a slight psychological boost that will be in your favour. And frankly, anything that works. So why I'm mentioning this? I'm mentioning this because if you just Google UX design psychology, you'll find a lot of results, but all the results tend to be very, very poor. Now, what do I mean by very poor? They focus on things that are very practical, very useful, but kind of miss the point slightly. So quite commonly, you'll see the Gestalt principles as the flagship psychology principles for UX designers. What the Gestalt principles are 7 principles about layout and relationship of objects, which if you use in graphic design or page layout, will cause people to think of things. Now, an example of this is proximity effect, where things that are close together are seen to be together. So if you put icons into groups, people will assume that every group of icons are in some way related. So if you just make sure that you do group-related content, it reinforces the fact that they are grouped and helps people navigate through by choosing the sort of meta big group and then zooming down to the small details. Then got, similarity, where if there's a color which is the same, if there's a size which is the same, a typeface the same, etc., people assume those bits to be the same. So if you had 4 or 5 groups of objects on a page, but the first object of every group was red, people will see some relationship between the first object of each group, even though the group's different. Now, I can go on, but I'll just recommend that you Google Gestalt principles. I'll put something in the show links below about these, and yeah, use them. I'm not saying abandon them, but there's a massive load of psychology out there, which, as UX designers, we're quite poor at appreciating. Now, psychology isn't one thing. Now, when you think about what you're doing in school, in chemistry or physics, those sciences have these sort of big universal theories. So in chemistry, universal theory is going to be the bonding between atoms. Chemistry is all about making and breaking different bonds between atoms. But psychology as a science is very different. Now, you got 6 key kinds. There's psychodynamic psychology, which is the one that most people are familiar with. When if you say Sigmund Freud, people know who Sigmund Freud was. There's the active mind, subconscious mind, the ego, the id, etc. Now, I'm not going to go into terms about what the psychology bits are. There's a whole podcast for that. But just bear in mind, the first one is just about that active and subconscious mind. The second kind of psychology is behaviorism. So how ideas get linked together due to experience. You put your hand in the oven, it gets burnt because everything's hot, and you go, oven's hot, I'm not going to do that again. My behavior has now changed. I've learned from that. Same thing, you come into my lecture once a week, and I give you sweets, you think, it's great, and Chris, that lecturer gave me those sweets. But if I came in and gave you a really hard test and then sort of gave you a grade penalty every time you got a question wrong, you'd think I was really harsh and start avoiding me. So things you learn. The third kind is more about UX, which is cognitive psychology. And that's how we perceive things, our memory, how we solve problems, and relationship between items, such as Gestalt principles, which I mentioned previously before. Moving on, we have humanistic psychology, so the degree to which we have free will, how spontaneous we can be, how conscious we can be, what needs we have in what order, that kind of item. Number 5 is biopsychology, so the behavior is a product of nerves and chemicals and how they all link together. And that's one that sort of veers into psychiatry if you're trying to treat something like schizophrenia with various drugs, and it's biochemical treatment. The last kind is sociocultural, which is behavior being influenced by our social environment. Now, we will go to McDonald's and we'll act a certain way. Then we will go to a Michelin-star restaurant. We're not going to act a certain way because our environment has changed, our behavior has changed. Now, I'm going to backtrack onto what I said a bit earlier about cognitive psychology. Now, cognitive psychology is a whole field of psychology. You can do a whole PhD in this. Trying to capture all of this in one podcast is really limited, so I'm just going to go really quickly over it. Now, this is the thing that drives our field the most. Think about that. When we look at something, what we perceive, and how we feel, how we react due to what we see, how many things we can think of, how many things pull ideas out of our mind, how false memories are created, how we solve problems, how we feel when we're solving problems, how we link ideas together, how we link emotions together. These are all cognitive aspects. So why is it that something so important is kind of ignored by the whole field? Now, this, of course, is a very sweeping generalization. There are amazing designers out there who have great knowledge of cognitive psychology, but I've got a PhD student who's currently researching how should we design UX courses? How should we teach UX to create the best student ready for industry? One of the things he did, he looked at what everyone's asking for in industry when they're putting UX adverts out there. And he's looked at UX courses, say, right, what are people recruiting for? What are the courses creating in the syllabus? And then how do these two overlap? Now, that's going to be a big overlap between them, and there's also going to be differences here and there. There's going to be overlap between computer science and user interface courses. I'm not going to go into detail here, but one thing that really struck out, psychology is almost absent. Almost no employers are asking for any kind of psychological experience or any kind of psychological training, and almost no UX courses are providing it. So we are creating a whole industry of designers, practitioners, businessmen, future leaders and current leaders who are at some level not fully trained in psychology, the thing that drives the field. Now, why is that important? Now, think of something similar at university. Think of engineering. If you were an engineer and you were to try and design a bridge or design a high-performance motor car, you're working for Ferrari, you can actually just do anything in engineering, and you don't understand physics, which is the fundamental science behind engineering. You couldn't expect to do very well. Now, I remember in my first job when I started as a design engineer, talking to a guy who was near retirement. He'd been in the business for a long time. And I mentioned that my degree was in design. It was actually product design, and it's from a engineering school. So he was asking me about calculus and all these other tools which engineers use. And I just had to look at him and say, I've never done calculus. No, at that point, I didn't even know what calculus was. And he looked at me like, how are you here? How did you get a degree? How did you get a job if you don't know calculus? Because to him, as an engineer, calculus was one of these fundamental languages of engineering. And it's also a fundamental language of physics. So they all go hand in hand. So it's really important that as UX designers, to create better products, to create better experiences, we need to enhance our understanding of cognitive psychology, understanding of what stimuluses do to perception, what stimuluses do to memory, what stimuluses do to problem solving, and how they all link together. Once we understand that, then we get a brief, or we set ourselves a brief that we want to achieve a certain effect on a page. We want to convince people that a certain path is right, or we want to create equal feeding opportunity here. Then we've got a toolbox that we can pick up and we can draw from, and we can start to, rather than just feeding our way through iterative design, use testing, which, that might get to the answer, it might get us there, but rather than going through that long haul, we can just take these principles of user interface, take these principles of psychology, take these principles of just how the mind works, and jump straight to the answer, rather than feeding our way. Now, why is that important? Because in iterative design, you are making small adjustments over time. Same in agile design, you're making small adjustments over time, but you're making small refinements rather than fundamentally challenging what the underlying concept is. If your underlying concept is already grounded in things that work really well, you're going to be in a fantastic place to make everything work. So what's happened now? You got your managers, you got your designers, got your team leaders, and you're thinking, you know what, we need to know more about this. What should we do? The best thing to do is just go onto Kindle, go onto Bookshop and just get almost any book on cognitive psychology. Now, I read a book the other day. It was called A Graphical Introduction to Psychology, I believe. And that was just a very, very basic overview of what psychology was. It wasn't it wasn't in great depth. It wasn't to even an undergrad status. But what it did do is it gave me a deeper understanding of all the sections of psychology which I hadn't actually explored before. So the humanistic, the biopsychology, the social psychology. And you go, you know what, I can start to realize what these things are. I understand how they link, and starting to see that, you know, the social psychology and the cognitive psychology can actually connect together. Now, why do I say keep really basic guides as a starting point? Oh, by the way, the book was called Psychology, Graphical Guide, rather than Introduction to Psychology. Psychology is so underappreciated in the design field that anything you do will give you at least a jumpstart forward. Now, after you've done, read some basic books and got some basic abilities, sure, you can find courses, you can find local college courses, you can find online courses. You can look to do sort of any degree of certification that can take you further, and that's going to be great. But the starting point is, let's just start moving the UX field forward. Let's start educating ourselves on psychology, even if it's watching YouTube videos, even if it's reading, quick books on Blinkist. Anything we do to improve ourselves will get us to another point. Now, this podcast, one episode couldn't ever be enough to cover all these things. Now, in the next 2 weeks, I'm going to dedicate the time to covering just user interface principles that are grounded in cognitive psychology. And then move on the following week into dark UX and how you can use the kind of psychological tricks about how we think and persuasion to, well, first to get people to click on things that they wouldn't click on before, which is the dark part, but also to click on things that rethink what they're doing and why for a positive meaning, that you can use the tricks of dark psychology for very good reasons. So we're really going to delve deep into this for the next few weeks, thinking about getting that cognitive psychology up. So I hope that you go forward and find some great books. I'm going to link some books in the description of this podcast. And I look forward to covering more in-depth practical items that you can use in your daily design business. So that's all for today. I'm going to click off here before we go into any more details. Runtime goes into crazy length. If you found this podcast today useful, please subscribe. And if you like what you hear, please go and leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps the show grow and helps get the message out that what we're doing here really makes a difference to your life. So, this is the Usability Podcast. I've been Dr. Chris Parker. Please follow us on YouTube at Design Learning Tutorials. Talk to us on Twitter at UserGenDesign. I'll speak to you next week.